And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud host of the Absa Champagne in Africa Festival 2024. Absa is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. Well, that is, of course, the scene where I am right now. Let me just paint you a little bit of a picture of where I am. To the right is one of those buildings in sort of Ilovo and Sandton on the border that people think is quite nice, but is actually quite ugly. So I'm going to stop looking at that and move my gaze slightly to the left, which is where I suppose the party really starts. You start to see people with champagne, with bubbles. Further to my left, there are actually bubbles floating around. I thought for a moment there would be the kind of bubble that would pop when you touch it, but actually it's some kind of balloon or something. And that's nothing at all like the bubbles that people have in most of the glasses that are being shown here and, really handed around on platters here. There's a large number of people who I think are beginning to enjoy themselves and looking up at the weather and thinking, I'm glad I wasn't here last night, because Joburg last night did have big storms. A couple of big things we must just talk about before we get to all of that. The US rally in the United States showing no sign of abating. You saw, of course, what happened with the US Federal Reserve last night, another 25 basis point cut in interest rates, and that seems to have given markets yet another day of momentum so far. Of course, a long day trading ahead in the United States. I thought, and I was fascinated by the comment made by Jerome Powell last night. He's the chair of the US Federal Reserve, our Lesetja, if you like, slightly different system, but you see the same kind of characters. And he was asked pretty directly, would you resign if Donald Trump asked you to go? He said no. And Trump has said that he would try and remove Jerome Powell. Powell's answer, a bit more diplomatic than that. He said that the president, under the law, doesn't actually have the power to remove any of the governors, and he would be one of the governors. It does really show you some of the political undercurrents in Washington right now and what people are thinking about, what that is going to mean for American financial policy, what it's going to mean for interest rates, and the impact that that will have on us. And then China today implementing, I suppose, another stimulus measure, $1.4 trillion. Doesn't go directly into the economy, goes to municipalities to try and strengthen their balance sheets. Again, Trump very much a part of that, because there has been some speculation that, in fact, China would go a lot further, would pump even more money. I mean, I don't know anyone else who has $1.4 trillion to pump anywhere. The point is that they seem to be very concerned about what Trump is going to do. They're keeping some of their fiscal powder dry in case they need it. Trump comes in and then immediately institutes tariffs up to 60% on Chinese goods entering the US. And this follows the news we had yesterday that, in fact, Chinese companies have been pushing as much product through their ports as they can to get them to the United States and to the EU before any kind of tariff can be imposed. So it does just show you what the mood is like in China at the moment. As always, good to hear from you this evening on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567, and of course your voice notes tonight on 072 702 1702. Don't forget the Friday Biz Blitz in about 40 minutes from now.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
We're live tonight from the Absa Champagne in Africa Festival 2024. They're bubbles, well, literally up, down, left, right, wherever you look at the moment. People arrive, starting to enjoy what's on offer here. Viwe Bacela is the head of marketing for Absa CIB client coverage for international and strategic projects. She's one of, I think, the lucky people here tonight. Viwe, good evening. What exactly have you got planned for tonight? How's the festival been going so far?
Good evening, Stephen. So as you've said, we started the festival last night. Very, very great start so far. We didn't anticipate a lot of rain, although we had planned for it, but we were able to mitigate and still make sure that our clients that were in attendance had a brilliant evening. Tonight is going to be no different. We have a lot planned for the evening. As you've said already, there's bubbles flowing everywhere. We've got champagne, but not only that, we've got an experience that, transcends beyond the champagne. We've got music, we've got good food, we've got art, we've got fashion. So it really is a sensory experience that we've curated for our guests this evening.
You would have had to plan well in advance to make sure you had enough champagne,
of
just
course.
for a start.
Of course. So one of the key factors about this year's event is that we have over 40 champagne houses from the Champagne region in France. which meant that we've had to work very, very hard for a number of months to make sure that all of the champagne houses do have the adequate number of bottles that will be available tonight. So we've got bottles that will be on consumption and also for sale for anyone that wants to take anything home. And we're very comfortable that from yesterday evening and tonight that we very well prepared and stocked up, particularly for the festive season ahead.
I suppose this is also a way of, it's not just about champagne and bubbles, but there is something about champagne and bubbles that really brings people together, isn't there?
Exactly.
You hear the cork go and you're immediately kind of going.
No, definitely. It's not just about champagne and bubbles, although, globally, I think we can all acknowledge that champagne is synonymous with celebration, it's synonymous with excellence, and that's really what it is for us. It's about celebrating our client stories. It's about showcasing African excellence. It's about showcasing our client successes as well. So that's really what it is. And what better way to pair that with champagne?
I think people have come here for a party. It's a Friday. I get a sense quite a lot of business is going to be done here.
Of course, that goes without saying. I think it's for us. It is very important for us to interact with our clients over and above just the transactional. It's about interacting with our clients in a more casual setting. Just again showing the fact that we want to be part of their journeys, whether it's in the boardroom or in some place over a glass of champagne.
Viwe, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of it. Viwe Bacela is the head of marketing for Absa CIB Client Coverage, International and Strategic Projects. If you're going to talk about champagne and wine in South Africa, there's a name, he's going to hit me for embarrassing him, but there's a name that you immediately kind of think of, and that name, of course, is Michael Fridjhon. He's the founder of winewizard.co.za, a visiting professor of wine business at UCT. Michael, good evening. Nice to finally meet you. I've heard your name, I've heard you on the radio a million times, I've read your pieces a million times. We're at an event to celebrate champagne. What is it about champagne that sort of spells exclusivity, that kind of just makes an event different from everything else?
And Champagne has an extraordinary history. As a wine producing area, it goes back a few thousand years. There are Roman artifacts that get dug out of the cellars of Champagne all the time. But it really was the number one producing area supplying the very large city of Paris. So in that sense, it had a springboard into the world of commerce. It was in that sense the first of the really international categories in the world of wine, and it is a beverage that's very easy to enjoy. So you didn't necessarily need to have hugely sophisticated tastes to be seduced by champagne. And as a result, it is that truly recognizable international brand. The brand of champagne is protected massively by the French authorities. You can't call a sparkling wine champagne, not legally, in any other country. It's because of the champagne method, it's because of where it comes from, it's because it's so well protected, and it's because there are so many fabulous brands that individually, jointly and severally go out there and keep the flag flying.
It's a bit like Rooibos. Rooibos is Rooibos, not anything else, and champagne is champagne, and actually everyone knows that.
And they do, and they recognize it. And it also means that if you are a leader in champagne, you already start off on a kind of platform significantly more elevated than most other wine producers trying to get consumer attention in a very busy market.
When you have a big gathering like this, you can probably see certain trends in champagne. Are there trends in which types of champagne are produced, which types of champagne are consumed? Do you see changes in what kind of champagne is there's demand for?
So there's a worldwide trend which is something we saw starting probably 20, 25 years ago, and that was that initially champagne had been dominated by the big houses, the so-called Grand Marque. But towards the 1990s, and as people started looking more for craft, artisanal, boutique producers, then the 5,000 smaller growers started to get a little bit of attention. I ran a competition in Champagne, in fact, a couple of them ahead of the millennium, to get grower champagnes onto airlines and into markets, because suddenly there wasn't enough champagne amongst the big brands ahead of the millennium. And that trend has absolutely taken off. So the one thing you'll see are lots of seemingly unknown names, craft producers, and that is a worldwide trend.
I want to say like craft beer, but that would probably
just like craft beer. Yes.
Lower the tone of the conversation slightly. Do you find that some markets prefer different types of champagne? I mean, do we as South Africans prefer different types of champagne to, I don't know, people in North America?
So yes, and that's also been or had a long history. So the Tsar of Russia, who made Cristal his champagne of choice, loved sweet champagne, as did all the Russians, as did the Americans. The Brits were the first to say, actually, we'd rather have a drier drink. So an international trend is for extra Brut or Brut Zero, no sugar added at that final moment before the final sealing of the final cork. But in South Africa, we've become probably the major market in the world for sweeter champagnes, for not just demi-sec, but things which are called nectar. And that's a feature of South African market that you probably won't find in many other countries. It's relatively new, and I think it reflects a South African preference that isn't being driven by international trends.
I suppose, what makes champagnes different from each other? So I presume that they follow certain principles when they're made, but there's certain things you can change. I had to look this up, but the soil, terroir, there's a better way to pronounce that, isn't there?
Terroir, indeed. The soil is important. Most of the big brands could hardly argue that they are site-specific. But what is a determinant is that the big brands, and even the small ones, have a house style, and that's determined by the choice of varieties that go into the blend or the cuvée. Blanc de Blanc would be, one imagines, mostly Chardonnay. There are a few smaller varieties that are allowed. The other two dominant varieties are Pinot Meunier and Pinot Noir, generally made so that the color doesn't appear in the juice. You separate the skins from the juice at pressing, which is why most white champagnes are made from red grapes. But it's the way they are put together, those subtle nuances which the chef de cave in champagne has to understand and get correct, because once it's in the bottle, you can't tweak it. And it lives with you for many years. It's not uncommon to drink 30, 40, 50-year-old champagne, and what you made 30 years ago is there to remind you that you either did get it right or you didn't. So in that sense, it is probably the most nuanced of all great wines, and the people who make it have to have that much more experience, competence, understanding of the soil, and understanding of the climatic conditions in a district which is really at the northernmost limit of successful viticulture.
I realize this is a big question. What makes some champagnes better than others? And I imagine this is the subject of some debate.
Well, one of the certainties is the precision and competence with which they're assembled, and in turn that has to do with the volume that the brand is compelled to put out. So if you're a very successful, very big brand, the winemaker doesn't have the same freedom of choice. He's got marketing department saying, listen, you've got to get out another 10 million bottles. We are booming. You've got to find the juice from somewhere. And if you're a brand where the owner effectively says, you know what, we make what we can, and if we run out, we run out. And those two sides of the spectrum, in a sense, determine the precision with which you can go about your task.
Michael Fridjhon, always good to meet an expert. Thank you very much indeed, sir. The founder of winewizard.co.za, visiting professor of wine business at the University of Cape Town. You know, of course, if you want to talk about wine and champagne in South Africa, Michael Fridjhon is the person. In a moment, we'll find out what's happening on the markets. You're with The Money Show, live from the Champagne Festival. It's 22 minutes now after 6 o'clock.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Viwe Bacela is portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. Viv, good evening to you. And of course, still, it would seem, the situation in the United States, the interest rate cut last night, Donald Trump still very much driving markets there tonight.
Yes, we are the S&P 500 up about 0.4%. It started the day a bit lower, but it's kind of drifted up for the entire day. And I think that's still being felt through some of the moves we're seeing in some of the share prices. I think if you had to look at anyone that was looking at the stock market before the Trump election, and you say what are the share prices that we'd look at, and it would be probably Tesla, which is up about 6.6%. Today, that one particular thing. Another one you'd look at, it would be the company Palantir, which is another company that's not quite as famous as Tesla, but it is very closely linked to his Trump's VP, J.D. Vance, via Peter Thiel. That's up another 4% today. So these Trump picks, let me say, are obviously still playing a role in the world. And the one other thing I would look at would be the Bitcoin price, which is again up about 1/3% at the moment.
The situation in China, I mean, another $1.4 trillion in stimulus, not direct into the economy, into municipalities. It really does show you that they still have a lot of work to do to get that economy going.
Oh, yeah, and even worse, the Trump election is quite bad for them. Because he's really targeted them for his tariff. He wants to put tariffs on everybody, but the highest will be on China. And unfortunately, the Chinese stimulus that we see right now is basically the kind of thing you expect from this particular Chinese government, really large, really costly, but I don't think will have the positive effect that they wanted to have. The Chinese system has been really dominated by the property sector, and a lot of these municipalities have been using property sales especially to finance their operations. And the fact of the matter that we see the property sector collapse as it has in China over the last little while, with companies going bankrupt, with ghost cities such emerging. I think that this is going to be something that's obviously politically feasible for the Chinese, but in terms of long-term effect on their economy and really boosting economic growth, I think this is not going to be what really does it.
I imagine also they need to keep their powder dry. I mean, this has been the analysis through the day. They need to keep something in reserve in case Trump does actually introduce those tariffs. In other words, the China story has still got a long way to run.
Oh, yeah, most certainly. I mean, people were saying that they need to be significantly more aggressive with the stimulus should those Trump tariffs come into play. Because the U.S. is the largest consumer, the Chinese are the largest manufacturer, and they make a lot of their operations from selling stuff to the U.S. And with some of the stuff, even the Biden administration has done in the past, things like, for instance, banning the sale of certain manufacturing equipment around chips, and the sale of chips to them. As trying to onshore, friendshore, as they call it, a lot of manufacturing. I think this is something that's going to be just, if anything, accelerated on Trump. And unfortunately, I don't think the world as a whole is going to escape this particular trade war. Once countries are getting into a trade war mindset, you easily find tariffs rising everywhere, globalization coming under pressure, and unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, more global trade makes us all out here. We all benefit from the fact that we trade with each other. And these kind of trade barriers are going to be difficult to handle for everyone in the world, I think.
Just a good reminder that we live in a food exporting country. Richmond, of course, hugely affected by the situation in China. Their shares down quite significantly on the day, I thought. And yet they made a profit, yes, quite a nice profit in rand terms, but still missed what analysts had been expecting.
Oh, yeah, most certainly. I mean, this is a share price that has been really volatile for a little while. Look, for whatever reason, maybe culture or whatever, the Chinese, when they started getting rich, really bought into the cachet of the European luxury goods makers. And the luxury goods makers started to basically, play into that market as well. So you'd find often, big luxury brands in, Italy, for instance. In Italy, the shops would sell maybe 1/3 of their merchandise to Chinese tourists. And so the Chinese market is becoming very important to these luxury goods makers. And the fact that we're seeing this economic slowdown in China, as well as there's some other legacy stuff that's happened over the last couple of years around, for instance, gifts to officials and so on, has put some of these companies under a bit of pressure. And I do think that, for this, they need to find another market. But I don't know if anyone else, is going to be quite as, a juicier prize as the Chinese have been for these companies recently.
And then a quick comment on fashion stocks. So the fashion group, TFG, up 5% today. They did have an update today. They've managed to keep costs down. They've done quite well in that, it would seem. Mr. Price is up, Woolworths are up, Truworths are up. I mean, something's happening with clothing stocks at the moment, it seems.
Oh, yeah. Look, I mean, I do think, obviously some of the retail sector is looking reasonably okay. I do also think that, we're getting to Christmas. South Africans love spending money, especially on clothes, as you get to Christmas. And so we are going to see a lot more activity happening here. But in terms of TFG, if you had to look at the overall, share price that we've seen this year alone, it's up 50%. and this is obviously, from a massive recovery. We aren't quite back to the high levels that we saw back in 2021. We're still about, 4 or 5% down from that. But, in the last, few months here, the share price has gone up quite significantly. And pretty much, I think this is to do with the kind of optimism we're seeing in South Africa in post-elections. And I think that is also driving a lot of the other retailers out there as well. There is a belief that the country is in the path for the company. I think that's kind of feeding through to many of these retail stocks.
Vive Govender, thanks very much indeed. Always good to hear your thoughts. Portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. You're with The Money Show live tonight from the Absa Champagne in Africa Festival 2024.
French chic meets African luxury. 702 live at the Absa Champagne in Africa Festival.
The Money Show.
The Friday File.
The Friday File.
I'm French Chic. Who knew? 18 minutes to 7. Nice to have you along with us here on The Money Show, live, of course, from the Absa Champagne in Africa event 2024. The party, I must just tell you, moving up a gear in the last few moments, and I think people really are beginning to enjoy themselves. Well, let's find a little bit more about the business of wine, the business of champagne. Hervé Delabesse is the French wine guy. He's also the general manager and founder of Premier Cru Wines. He joins us now. Hervé, good evening. I know you know a thing or two about wine, you know a thing or two about champagne. This is one of those events where people get together to actually really enjoy the stuff that people talk about all the time.
That is correct. That is the one event that I'm always looking for the rest of the year. It's really the beauty of champagne, is the aspiration, it's the togetherness, it's the lifestyle. It's not only about celebration, but it's really about enjoying every single moment. It's really enjoying every single possibilities in that regard.
We were talking to Michael Fridjhon earlier. I know you'll know him. He's a sort of expert on this. He made the point that champagne is quite easy to drink, and I was reminded that it's the only drink that you'd ever be served at breakfast is champagne. Is that sort of part of it, do you think?
Correct. I mean, if you drink anything else at breakfast, people look at you oddly.
Yes.
But when they see you drinking champagne, they actually are looking forward to your lifestyle. They look at you with envy. It is really the champagne that can carry you throughout the day, that can actually be matching and meeting every single moment in life, including breakfast.
Don't do it too often. I suppose, along with champagne and wine generally, there's no other drink that comes close to the sort of almost infinite variety of wine and champagne. There are lots of other alcoholic drinks that try and compete. Whiskey has plenty of varieties, for example, but nothing comes close to just the sheer amount of different types of wine and champagne.
Not correct. When it comes to wine, in general, it's really about geography as well. And there's a term that I'd like to define, which is a French term called terroir, which is the combination of climate, soil, and culture. And by culture, it's history and people. And throughout the world, many countries produce wine. It's the diversity, it's the differences that can be enjoyed. It's like traveling in a way. And if I take the example of South Africa is a beautiful country, and yet people still enjoy to travel around the world to discover new cultures, new history, new landscapes, and new people. Wine is about the same thing. We produce amazing wines in South Africa, yet it's also beautiful to discover the diversity and the differences in the terroir, in their expressions.
When you, and I know this is something you do, you try and create a wine experience. Where do you start? What do you do? Do you start with a particular wine? Do you start with a place?
Well, I start with the consumer. The idea is to match wine and people. It's tell me what you like, and I'll tell you where to explore. Wine is really about journey. And the idea on crafting an experience is to accompany you through that journey while having fun and learning at the same time. So I really start with the people. And I tell you, tell me what your taste buds like. Tell me what are your moments, your occasions. And that's how we craft the experience around.
Do you think most people know what their taste actually is? I realize that's quite a strange question. There'll be plenty of people who drink wine on a regular basis who have a very well-defined palate. They'll know exactly what it is that they like and what they dislike. I think a lot of other people, if you had to say to them, what is your taste? I'd sort of look at you, frankly.
So I think it takes a lifetime sometimes to discover our own taste and to define it. I sometimes draw a parallel between coffee and wine. When we start drinking coffee in the early years, when we're teenagers, we don't like it usually.
Yeah.
It's too bitter, we put a lot of sugar, we put a lot of milk, so technically we hide the taste. It's only later on when we take the sugar out, the milk out, that we understand the differences between Arabica and Robusta. And that Robusta is acidic, it's bitter, it needs to be blended, whereas Arabica, it's pure, it's noble, and it's elegant. And afterwards, you discover actually the countries the difference between Arabica from Ethiopia or Kenya, different altitudes, different ways of roasting it. So the more you go, the more precise you get. And wine follows the same pattern. We start by drinking sweeter wines when we're young, then we drink more fruit-forward wines, and then we start appreciating the cultivars, the origins, the regions, the countries. And that's where the journey progresses. And for some people that journey is shorter, for some people that journey is longer. But it's about understanding your own taste buds and accompanying them.
Do you find that people almost automatically sort of drink drier wines, less sweet wines as they get older? I mean, is that the kind of almost natural way of things? I mean, you're talking about coffee, you're speaking my language because I'm an incredibly fussy coffee drinker. But I mean, do you find that actually as people get older, they really do throw away the sweeter wines?
Yes, I also think it's a sign of the times too. If we take the example of champagne, if you think in the 1800s, the most common taste was actually sweet. The most popular wines in the world were the dessert wines. You're thinking Vin de Constance, you're thinking Sauternes, you're thinking Tokaj in Hungary. Champagne, drunk in the 1800s, was extremely sweet, much sweeter than the demi-sec that we know today. And if we look at the trends in champagne, now we go more for extra brut or zero dosage, and zero dosage has absolutely no sugar. It's the naked truth in a way. So the sign of a time also follow the sign of a society.
Okay, so you want to create a wine experience. People contact you, they say, we're going to do a wine experience. You ask them about what they like. Is there a particular order of wines that you would follow? I mean, if you're having a wine experience, you're not just going to have one type through the event. You're going to have several types. Do you start with one and definitely end with a different one?
Yes, most definitely. So the start usually has to be champagne when it comes to me.
Well, of course, breakfast. Yes.
And champagne has that beautiful energy that enables you not only to reset the day, say, we've arrived, let's seize the moment, but also it is a great palate cleanser. It actually negates what you had before. So champagne or any other sparkling wine would actually be the start of a journey, and then you usually go increasing in terms of body and complexity. You always want to finish on a high note, so you want to finish with wines that is the fullest and the most complex in that perspective. And then when it comes to dessert, then you can finish with a dessert wine.
And a dessert wine's usually very sweet to go with the dessert.
I mean, there are a variety of degrees of sweetness, but usually it would go or replace a dessert. The best pairing for a dessert wine would be cheese, in my perspective.
Yes.
And not only because I'm French.
Do you make cheese in France? So there's also the setting. So I know some people can be, it's really about everything that's happening around them. It's about the glass. It's about how it's presented. How important is that?
It is essential because the same wine may take difference in different settings, depending on the mood, depending on the altitude, depending on what you've had in terms of food right before, depending on what happened through your day. So creating a setting that people are going to actually listen, enjoy, and be amenable to the discoveries is going to be essential in that perspective. So stemware has to do justice to the wines. It has to be neutral and not influence as well, but also clearing the mindset and having the right type of food that's not overpowering. If we take an example of cheese, when it comes to that example, you don't want a cheese that's going to overpower the room and be way too smelly. So sometimes advanced French cheese may not be the best way.
It is really about the pairings, isn't it? I mean, you want to have your food and your wine and then the combination of them. And I'm just thinking at the moment of sort of, wine and cheese together as a particular thing. Without the cheese or without the wine, it doesn't really work. But those combinations really matter.
Yes, I have an image that I use when I do food and wine pairing. It's what I call the concept of ratatouille. Have you seen the movie Ratatouille?
Yeah.
You've seen there's a sequence with the little rat, the little chef. He's explaining to his friends how to pair different flavors together. And he's got a piece of cheese and a piece of fruit in each hand. We're talking a lot about cheese today. And he's taking a bite of a cheese and there's yellow fireworks happening.
Yeah.
He's taking a bite of a fruit and there's red firework happening.
Yeah.
And then he has them together and there's brand new colors that arrive. It's really 14th of July, massive fireworks. And you do the same thing. You have a sip of a wine, you have a bite of a food, and you have them together. And food and wine pairing is about food and wine matching. And you match a body, you're going to make some flavors that were more discreet come more to the forefront. So it's really about associating them so that the secondary notes become more prominent and more refined.
I mean, wine, so we're talking about, wine can be seen as just something you drink, but it's a sensory experience. And let me just go back a little bit, and I hope I don't horrify you with this, but I know a young child, if you give a young child a glass of a chocolate milkshake, that's a full sensory experience for the child because they pour it over their face, right? So they've got the sort of coldness of it. Wine, You don't pour it over your face, but you smell it. It's as you sort of take the glass, you swirl it if you want, but as it comes to your mouth, there's an experience that's not the taste. So it's all of these things together that makes it so special.
Correct. I mean, all the senses actually come together when it comes to wine. Even the sound, because if you're cheering, if you're clinking, or if you hear the sound of bubbles, when it comes to champagne, that is even a sense that is combined.
So it's on your face even.
True, indeed, yes. So the sight, the smell is obviously very important when it comes to wine. The sense and the touch is, your that mouthful expression that you were talking about. And you're going to get different characters in the way that it touches your palate, and even different angles. And that's going to give you different information about the wine, about its complexity.
I suppose that would also explain why a glass is so important. You can have a glass of wine that hits your mouth in one way, a different glass that hits your mouth in a different way.
That's correct. And the shape of a glass is definitely going to influence the concentration of the flavors, the aromas, the expression of the body, and also the way that you're going to tilt your head is also going to impact the way that the wine is going to hit your mouth.
Often you will watch an American drama, for example, and in an attempt to show that one of their characters is rich and cultured, and therefore a goodie or a baddie, they will talk about a wine, usually a red wine for some reason, and they'll mention the year. And they do that in an attempt to show that their character is sophisticated. I'm sure you must watch that in horror sometimes. Does the year of a wine matter, or does the variety matter more? I realize, some older wines, because they're older, the value is really, goes up. But does the year of a wine really matter that much? Some years, of course, are better than others.
It definitely does. So obviously when it comes to a year associated with wine, it's what we call a vintage. And the vintage variation is obviously the combination of the way the climate, the soil, that terroir has expressed itself throughout the year. Now when it comes to the old world was not always perfect conditions. If I look at France, we don't have such a generous weather climate all around France. If you go to the north of France, it can be miserable in winters. And so that variation has been more important in the old world. When the vines have been planted into the new world, there has been actually more perfect weathers. When people came planting the vines in South Africa, the conditions are perfect here to grow vines. So vintage variation may be less important in the new world, but in the old world that is very, very significant. And that's why one of the best ways to explore a wine that you particularly like is to have what we call a vertical tasting, which means a tasting of the different years that this wine has expressed itself.
Does the rarity of a wine always mean that a wine is better? I mean, some bottles of wine can go for an absolute fortune, but I don't know if they're better.
I think that sometimes it's subjective to the market. There can be a lot of speculation on some of the rarest wines. Speculation to me is the enemy of that, the value versus price factor. You have the value wine, which is linear, but the price line that can be exponential.
Yeah.
And everybody has different price points where they get disconnected. For some people it goes all the way, for some people it starts at the introduction.
Hervé, thank you very much indeed. You've been working in wine for many years now. I get the sense you're still as enthusiastic about it as when you started.
It is very important. What I love about wine is the stories, is the people, is discovering and accompanying people on their journeys, and that will always remain.
Hervé, thanks very much indeed. Hervé Delabesse is a Champagne Experience official. He's also the general manager and founder of Premier Cru Wines. It really does tell you, I suppose, how important the soil of the wine, by which I mean the discussion, the glass, the who you're with, all of that matters. It's a fascinating conversation to have.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Time for the Friday Biz Blitz here on The Money Show this evening. You know the number, 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. First question, you know how it works. We get if you get the answer right, we move on to the next question. If you get the answer wrong, we move on to the next caller. Which South African-born electric vehicle company owner hit the $1 trillion mark after Trump's election victory? In other words, I'm looking for the owner of the company that hit the $1 trillion mark after Trump's election win. They make electric cars. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
Stephen Grootes
Taking your calls
on 011 883
0702.
Which electric vehicle company owned by a South African hit the $1 trillion mark after Trump's election victory? First question on the Friday Biz Blitz this evening. Let's go to Anthony in Rand Park Ridge. Anthony, hi, good evening.
Good evening, how are you doing? All right.
I'm well, thanks, Anthony. I'm hoping you know the answer.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Of course it's Elon Musk. I suspect
Yes,
he's going to
that's
be the
correct.
subject of many questions to come for quite some time, Anthony. Okay, you ready for the next question? Here we go.
Sure.
The
Give it a
province
bash.
of Champagne, is found in which European country? And it's not the Switzerland example I'm looking for. The province of Champagne is found in which European country?
Well, I would have said France.
That France would be right, Anthony. Indeed, it is
great
France. Okay,
stuff.
you ready? Okay, here we go. Next question now. Jerome Powell has said he will not resign if Donald Trump asks him to step down as the chair of which bank?
He's the Federal Bank of the United States of America.
I'm going to need the proper title, Anthony. I'll give you one more go, but I'm going to need the proper title.
Of the Reserve Bank of the United States.
You need to put it together for me.
The Reserve
Oh,
Bank of the
Anthony.
United States of America.
I'm sorry, Anthony. I'm going to move on. Mpahlele and Mamelodi, hi. Jerome Powell is the chair of which bank? Mpahlele?
Eurobank.
No, I'm afraid. Okay, one more guess?
But I know Elon Musk is the owner of the electric car.
Yes. I'm afraid it's a different question now in Mpahlele. Sorry about that. 011 8830702. Let's try Sufyan in Northcliffe. Have I got your name correct?
Yes, you do.
Sufyan. Yes. The Jerome Powell is the chair of which bank?
Federal Reserve Bank.
It is the Federal Reserve Bank. Sufyan, good evening. Congratulations. You've won the Friday Biz Blitz on The Money Show.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, Sufyan, thanks very much indeed. And thank you for the call this evening. You with The Money Show.